we are going to talk about ecosystems, specifically clusters. Ukraine is a cluster, and how Ukraine as a cluster also interacts with global clusters and superclusters around the world. So panel is really intended for anybody that's interested in entrepreneurship in general, especially global entrepreneurship. Hello, my name's Rick Rasmussen. I'm currently industry fellow at UC Berkeley. I'm from Silicon Valley, born and raised. That's kind of a rare thing. And I helped build 3 startups from scratch, take all 3 public and sell them for a collective $12 billion. Then I became a venture capitalist, hated it. That's another story. And then now I get to teach, which is super fun, and I get to help out with panels, which is even more fun. So thank you for being here. We'll have a good time. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce. We have an amazing panel here today. So I'm going to go ahead and call each one of them up and ask them to say a word or so about themselves. But to start off with, Keith Silverang, if you can join me up here, please. Keith is a board member of Grandland. Please. Sir, why are you here?
Why am I here? I don't know. Okay. Yeah, right. So I was building a career in Finland. Actually, I've been there for about 35 years, which revolved around high-tech campuses and growth companies. And we ended up building that up into a 6-country chain. And I've pretty much seen it all when it comes to every aspect of growth entrepreneurship, from the bricks and mortar you see around you here today to the personalities that populate the community, the funding, everything, the best and worst of it. So I can probably give you an objective view on the subject of ecosystems.
Is it ecosystems or ecosystems?
Tomato, tomato, potato, potato. You know, if you saw When Harry Met Sally.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Should I sit here?
Next, I'd like to invite up Nataly Veremeeva, Director of TechUkraine. Nataly.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm also excited to be here, and really ecosystems are one of my favorite topics because I believe in collaboration, in cooperation, and in interconnection of elements, players that are actually able to grow something really significant. I believe that one person is just good, but when we have a combination of different unique actors, that is becoming great. So I'm just really excited to be here. And we at TechUkraine are doing this for Ukrainian ecosystem. So we're studying the gaps and launching their initiatives. One of the initiatives are the portal, techukraine.org. So that's basically it. Yeah. Rick, do you want me to tell something else, like something about myself?
A good introduction. That was a great introduction. Thank you. We're going to call up the rest of the panelists, and we'll go ahead and get started. So next, Mr. Chris Burry, co-CEO of the U.S. Market Access Center in Silicon Valley.
Thanks, Rick. Just to quickly introduce myself, my own background is I'm a serial entrepreneur, had a whole bunch of companies, 3 exits, 3 that didn't work as well. But you learn a lot from the companies that don't work, and you apply it to the ones that do. For the last 10 years, I've run the U.S. Market Access Center, which is a fairly unique company in that we do training, coaching, and mentoring of startups, and also ecosystem building all over the world. We've run close to 200 programs, 42 countries, and glad to be here, happy to be back in Ukraine, and hope to be able to share some insight from what works and what doesn't work from what we've seen.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. And then, last but not least, my new good friend, Miguel Martin, President of Science, Tech, and Innovation, United Nations SDGs, and the World Business Angels Investment Forum.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I'm very glad to be here, to be part of the panel. Basically, before anything else, anyone that want to talk about building bridges between the Ukrainian ecosystem and the Spanish ecosystem in Spain and Latin America, I will be available after the panel for talking with anyone that could be interested in going.
Okay. Thank you. And applause. And we're going to do the panel cheer. So everybody put their hands here. I've never seen this on a panel. Okay. Ready? 1, 2, 3, ecosystems. 1, 2, 3, ecosystems.
Woo-hoo!
All right. Thank you. Thank you for letting me do that. So to kick things off, again, I mentioned I'm from Silicon Valley, and everybody holds up Silicon Valley as the aspiration for ecosystems around the world. Oh my God, we want to be just like Silicon Valley. So I want to go around to start with and say, do you agree with that? Or do you think that's full of something when I say the world should aspire to be like Silicon Valley? Yeah.
Well, the world should aspire to be like Silicon Valley. Well, I completely disagree with that, actually.
What?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Silicon Valley is California, you know? So, but the problem is that you can't replicate Silicon Valley. It's unique. So if you aspire to be a replica of Silicon Valley, you're going to fail. Best you can do is pick the elements that make sense and adapt them to whatever your local environment is, and try to play on your own strengths. Good strategy is built on your strengths, not your weaknesses. So try to be something you're not, and come up on a stage like this, you're going to fail. And that's what's going to happen if you try to replicate Silicon Valley here or anywhere else.
So we're talking about assets and strengths. Can you talk a little bit about the tech system in Ukraine?
Sure, with pleasure.
Please.
Actually, I think that for now, and you see currently there's growing interest to the Ukrainian tech ecosystem, and I believe that since 1991, when we gained our independence and we opened our gates to the Western world and started with IT outsourcing industry, we did a lot, and that was good start with IT outsourcing. So IT outsourcing companies opened the market and created the base, and currently we see the growth of the startups and also the product companies. When we're speaking about the percentage, recently, like 3-4 years ago, I was speaking that 80% was the IT outsourcing companies, and 20-30% are the products and startups. I think that for now the combination changed and the balance, and we have around 40-50% taken by the startups. We have already somewhere around 200,000 IT professionals working in the industry. Quite a lot of achievements of this again IT outsourcing companies, because they are having clients in the Fortune 500 list. They are getting their rankings, like the top rankings. But also we have 3, or rather for now already 4 unicorns. We have quite a number of investors that already entered the market, and if we compare the reports from the previous years and this year's, we see the growth of investors, foreign investors coming into the market to invest into the early stage startups, not only the late stage startups, and that means the increased trust in the ecosystem. Apart from that, of course, we have the clusters, we have associations, we have co-working spaces, we have Unit City, that is like one of the headliners that was really pushing the whole vision about what Ukraine can be when it succeeds in the tech sector. And we have quite a lot of other things, like this event is happening for now, like it's also a great achievement and a good ambition for us to open the gates of Ukraine to the rest of the world, and also the rest of the world get more connected to Ukraine, because I believe that's something that we need to start speaking more to the world and understand global trends and be more connected. And that's actually the topic of our today's panel.
It
right?
is indeed. It is indeed.
Yeah. So I can actually tell a lot about the ecosystem, but better probably save time for the discussion, but not the overview. But if you're interested, we at our portal publish a lot of information about Ukrainian tech, and I want the world to know more about us.
Excellent. And I can find that where online? What's the URL?
It's TechUkraine.org. That's the portal. The mission of this portal is to do this public promotion, and the promotion of Ukrainian tech and our successes to the rest of the world. And it's in English, so you can find the reports over there. You can find the information about tech hubs and also the news about different startups. Because I believe that we should ourselves celebrate our successes and also let the other world that we're not only about war, corruption, or whatever, but also about innovation, about startups, and a lot of things already going on in Ukraine. And I think that we need to share this ourselves. So that's what we're doing.
Excellent. Thank you. Chris,
Rick.
should Ukraine aspire to look like Silicon Valley?
I don't think it should aspire to look like Silicon Valley. I agree with the comment that you can't just sort of duplicate Silicon Valley. But the reality for me is I view Silicon Valley less as a place. I mean, you go back in history, it used to be a 2-mile stretch on 101, down somewhere near San Jose. Quote unquote, Silicon Valley sort of swallowed the whole San Francisco Bay Area. But more important to me is that Silicon Valley is a mindset. There's a way of thinking about value creation. There's a way of thinking about starting companies. And there's a lot to be learned from that. One of the things that I think Silicon Valley companies are really, really good at is being focused on value creation. And I see, a lot of startups all over the world start out with I've built some really cool technology. Let me find someplace I can sell it. I made a hammer. Let me go find a nail. There's a lot that you can learn about how people in Silicon Valley think about creating value for customers, think about creating products, and think about the process of creating companies to be able to bring that product to market. Mm-hmm. There are certain aspects you just can't replicate. You can't, at this point, replicate the density. You can't replicate the history. You can't magically recreate Berkeley and Stanford. But there's so much of the way entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley think that can be directly applied anywhere in the world.
So it's a mindset.
You have to separate the physical place and the density from the mindset. You can't replicate the density, but you can replicate the mindset.
Miguel, rather than say Silicon Valley, you're from Spain. Talk to me a little bit about that as an ecosystem. What does an ecosystem mean? And how is the ecosystem there formed?
Okay. First of all, I would like to answer very briefly about the Silicon Valley thing.
Sure, of course.
Because personally, I'm more and more involved in impact investment and impact innovation. And sometimes I think the Silicon Valley model about growing startups, following bigger and bigger fundraising rounds with the only goal of getting a big asset is not the only model that could be, applied worldwide. That is the first thing. The second thing, I think that in secondary cities or countries that they are not so big like the States, China, India, or Russia, or European Union or whatever, there is also possibilities for becoming building leading innovation hubs or building a leading innovation ecosystem. A sample could be, why not developing wine innovation ecosystem in spaces like Georgia, Spain, France, than they are specialized in wine. Or here in Ukraine, if a particular city or region is especially good in agri-food or creative industries, why not becoming the leading ecosystem, innovation ecosystem in that particular industry? Coming back to your question about Spain, I think that Spain has the chance of being the door for Latin America and the 600 million Spanish global community to Europe, and building bridges between Latin America, the Hispanic U.S. market community, and Europe and the Mediterranean, and the opposite. And that is basically, personally, in what I am more involved, is about connecting the local ecosystem. Local can be a city, a region, or even a country like Spain that is a middle-sized country with global ecosystem. Bringing global leading initiatives like World Business Angel Investment Forum, and I've been representing the last 5 years. Also like Entrepreneurship World Cup, which is the largest competition, or Start Grind, and is another initiative in partnership with Google for startups that is implemented in more than 600 cities. So there is ways where somebody like me, a simple individual, can be integrated in these global initiatives and can help the local ecosystem to become a little bit more global.
Excellent, thank you. I noted too when you talked about regions that have something in common, like wine or cheeses or certain sorts of technology, perhaps, call those clusters, so that we're also not only talking about ecosystems, but clusters around which you can build common understanding, development of supply chains, things along those lines.
Yeah, but you can also build like a wine startup mapping of the global, landscape of every startup that is trying to digitalize and to disrupt the wine industry. Why not, having a global perspective with you approach different industries. Yeah. And for example, the last startup that together with other investors, we have invested is a Moroccan artisan handcraft marketplace that is helping the artisans in Morocco to sell their products globally. It's becoming their digital and export department. And we are now replicating the model in Latin America and different countries. We are replicating the model in Spain. Why not could be replicated here in Ukraine, where there is also a quite interesting handcraft and artisan industry. And you can try to identify and map what is going on all around the world, startups that will be focusing in that particular field, and try to build a, we can say, virtual ecosystem on that particular field, and the same could be replicated in almost every market segment or industry.
Thanks. Keith, so you're in charge. So you've been told by the authorities, whoever they are, that an ecosystem needs to get built. So Silicon Valley, one could argue, was grown organically, not necessarily by government mandate, but you're in charge. What would you do? How would you grow an ecosystem from scratch, or how would you reinforce one that's just getting started?
Well, I would first of all try not to laugh when they approached me with that mandate, because I don't believe I don't believe in these centrally created ecosystem ideology at all.
What about China?
Thank you for proving my point. You can throw the money at it, but ultimately the conditions have to be there. And 5-year plans, I mean, it's going to succeed or fail based on the culture and the values and the prerequisites for growth. So the best thing you can do, you want to create ecosystems, is, I know I sound a bit, but get out of the way. Remove the obstacles to entrepreneurship. Create the basic infrastructure that's needed to, the fertile soil is needed. Remove obstacles from funding and allow the chemistry to happen. That you can do. But if you try to be the Dr. Frankenstein of the ecosystem world, you're more likely than not just another civil servant working for the state trying to justify your international travel and expense budget. And that is a waste of money, in my opinion. I hope that answers your question.
It does indeed. So Chris, same question to you. You told us earlier that you are one of these agencies that helps build ecosystems.
Oops.
Oops. I have obviously a different perspective, but from my perspective, everything that you just heard is actually true. That you need to get rid of the obstacles that are in the way of entrepreneurs being successful from a governmental perspective. You need to get rid of unreasonable regulations. You need to create regulatory environments that facilitate capital formation and all of those kinds of things. But you can actively go and create community. You can actively go and seed an ecosystem. The World Economic Forum in 2014 actually did a really interesting study on sort of the characteristics that need to be present for an ecosystem to be sort of growing and effective. And I view it sort of as a Rubik's Cube. The big mistake I see people make is they try to solve one problem at a time. But if you're trying to solve a Rubik's Cube, you have the 6 faces of the cube, and you can't just solve one. It's like, yay, I got it all green, and then you look at all of the other ones, it's messed up. And sometimes to make progress on one side, you got to mess up the other side. But you can do things like create incentives for capital formation for real venture. You can do things in terms of beginning to teach entrepreneurship. You can create entrepreneurship programs at universities. But the most important thing that you can do is create intelligent programs that help startups with coaching and mentoring and support that isn't available in the local ecosystem. The real sort of, I think, secret of Silicon Valley outside of the mindset is the fact that within a 1-hour drive of you, every single person you could possibly need to get help from to grow your company is there. And if you're not in one of these really dense ecosystems, you have to artificially seed the ecosystem. Because what happens is you create these seeds and you see networks start to form around it, and more nodes start to come and more nodes start to come. And I'm living actually right now, I've moved from Silicon Valley to Georgia. And it's been remarkable, my experience there, because I can actually see the network formation happening in real time. And we start to get more people come from Silicon Valley, come from London, come from Berlin, and the next time they come, they bring a friend. And eventually some of the friends stay. I mean, that's how I ended up there. But it's the big mistake, I think, is it's a generational activity. The problem is that people think that it's going to be done in like, okay, we're going to run a program for 2 years and magically we're going to have an ecosystem. No, it's a generation, but it needs the people who create those seed crystals around which all of these networks can form.
So Martin, if you were in a hurry, if you couldn't wait a decade to actually get an ecosystem built, if you were given the directive to make this happen sooner, what would you do?
Well, I tell you a personal experience. Before COVID, I was invited by the Swiss Entrepreneurship Foundation to go to the Balkans and give some kind of workshops to try to help to develop the ecosystem in Serbia, Montenegro. And what I found is that at the end of the day, I think that the ecosystem should start with building a community within the city or the region or the country. And on top of that community, you can start to build talent. And once you have the talent, you can start to try to develop startups. And once you have enough startups, maybe you could have a good business angel networks or other kind of fundraising or funding or investment. But you cannot create from scratch a real business angel network if you don't have previously a quantity and quality of startups, and the startups need to get good talent from technical management point of view, and the community is the foundation of everything. So I think that the COVID thing is one of obviously has changed a lot of things in the society. And if we think about the future, one of the positive that could be coming from the COVID is that we are really moving to a more physical and digital world where people can, entrepreneurs can get access to global specialized mentorship with the best possible expertise. When before for example, the startup acceleration programs, the best they were doing is getting the best mentor in the city or the best mentors in the region.
Yep.
Now you can get the real good mentors from anywhere in the world. Another startup that we are investing is generate. This is a beta tester, so it's not published yet. They have created a solution for creating and managing micro-acceleration programs. And everyone, like here in the panel or in the audience that have a specific expertise, can create his own micro-acceleration program, building, gathering the global mentor network, and offering that expertise not only for startups, but for example, a Michelin chef that has already made 3 good restaurants can show his methodology to people all around the world with this kind of platform, and have mentors from all around the world showing people about how to create and manage a successful restaurant. So I think that that window of opportunity that we have to approach investors, mentors to anywhere in the world, and not to be focusing not only in the local physical space, is going to change. It's already changing, but it's going to be develop and grow in the coming months and years.
Thank you. So we've been hearing some different views, but I think relatively aligned on how to develop ecosystems and some of the necessary agreements. I'd love to hear from you, Nataly.
Yeah, I actually also wanted to join this dialogue because that's pretty exciting. My MBA diploma was about clusters and about actually building the ecosystems. And I know that first there was this idea about that ecosystem could be built, though even Michael Porter says that you can't really just do it by just deciding to create a cluster or an ecosystem. It needs to start from the bottom, from the underground, so to say.
Organic growth.
Right. Yes, and it could be different reasons for this. Either a big company or a combination of successful factors or something else. So there were a number of factors how the ecosystem starts to grow. But what could be done for those ecosystems that already is growing by itself is to help to really manage, because ecosystem is a set of interconnected elements, and they are all the actors in the ecosystem need to play their role, and if one or several roles are not fulfilled yet, it hinders the development of the whole ecosystem. So there is very useful if there is some, point where strategic information is gathered, what is missing. And for example, here in Ukraine, we also had this. I was the national lead for the export strategy for IT sector, and we gathered around 150 stakeholders, and I was personally going to the interviews with them, and I was asking them 2 questions. What is not working? And what do you think how we should solve this? And we just listed it in our strategic document. And I think that I hope that this document also helped to really understand better what is missing, what is the next thing that we should do. Because, everywhere, when you start growing something, there is a bottleneck. And or low-hanging fruit, you also call it in the Western management. And so there is one of several things solving which you can actually boost the development of such a complex thing as an ecosystem. And it's not only one thing that you just push, for example, all the time investors, or all the time you're just doing accelerators or events. it's each time there is a different aspect that needs to have this growth, and we need to understand like what is the next thing to do, what is the next thing to do, and there needs to be, I don't know, maybe there could be in different ecosystems, either there are stakeholders that are gathering together and understanding this, or a strategic platform, or something else. So where TechUkraine wants also to do this, just I hope that we're getting there. But I think that for the ecosystem, or there are cluster management, or there is also such things. So people thinking strategically that are helping, maybe going to the right people and say, hey, you're doing this like great job, for example, education, but we're just missing the role of, I don't know, product manager. Could you please also launch these courses because there is a niche and you could do this? Or just this type of activities, not only that one person needs to do everything, but like, or for example, like we missed big events and now we have You Tomorrow Summit. There is like somebody had this idea that this is lacking, but this is like we need to scan the ecosystem all the time to understand what is the next thing to do. And ideally, there are people who actually are gathering and doing it like on a permanent basis.
What are the short-term priorities then for this ecosystem? What are the things that you believe at this point in time that are lacking, or what needs to be brought in?
That's a good question, because the previous ones are already like being a little bit solved. So we have more capital in the ecosystem for now. We have, like it's really nice to see that investors are really starting to be more and more interested, and we have startups that are growing. I think that, and currently we're really digging into launching entrepreneurship courses in universities, different places. So it's also something that's already tackled. What is the next big thing? Let me think about this question. I will return it. I will return to you.
So Keith, the authorities have come back to you and said, Ukraine as an ecosystem is developing. It's starting to show up here on the world stage. Probably needs to think about connections. Where would you go first? Which of the other global ecosystems would you reach out to first? Which are the most important to this country, do you think?
I'm not sure I would reach out to any global ecosystems at all. I mean, think about connections, and again, if I go back to the Finnish example, right? I mean, public sector put millions and millions into, the innovation system, quotation marks, and ecosystem creation and incubation systems and acceleration systems, and I mean, it was a huge money-making machine for consultants, at least. And I watched it for 20 years produce very little output. And other than international travel for public sector civil servants and international conferences. And then we saw the wonderful, thank you, Stephen Elip. We owe you for destroying Nokia. Because when he blew it up with his burning platform thing, if you remember that.
Yeah.
I mean, first everybody wanted to kill him. And then 10 years later, he was an accidental hero. Because that act took all the DNA that was concentrated in Nokia, which was overwhelming the driver of the Finnish economy, and suddenly scattered all that talent and experience all over. And we started seeing microclusters popping up all over the place as those formerly captive people became available and started seeding more capital and meeting up with each other. And here I come to the point. They had the networks, both domestically, regionally, and globally. They had them, either individually or in groups. And once the thing exploded, they reached out and started to themselves, entrepreneurially, build these networks. And then we started seeing gaming clusters, medical device clusters, RF clusters, smart materials. I mean, there were dozens of them. And today, I mean, we can only look back and say, thank you, Nokia, for blowing up. Thank you, Stephen Elip, for killing it. Because now we have the most diversified, knowledge-based economy ever in the country's history. And it didn't happen because of the public sector innovation system or because of managing, all due respect, the ecosystem. It happened because of an accident and because of talented, driven people, despite one of the most un-entrepreneurial friendly tax systems on planet Earth. Despite that disincentive, it's been a gift. So I wouldn't reach out to any particular global ecosystem or cluster. We need to go after anchor companies who are going to be our customers, supply chain members. We need to ourselves get off our asses and build the relationships. And when we do that aggressively enough and determinedly enough, then the clusters will happen because of human beings, not because of management. You asked me, so
I did. I love that.
that was your
answer.
first mistake.
I love that answer. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate.
I was being sarcastic.
It was funny because in the last panel that we had, it was all about corporate innovation, and the one company I held up as a company that was shocked by outside events, by the iPhone appearing and Nokia exploding as a result, was just that one. What we're talking about here is the whole idea of creative destruction, that ecosystems, once they're developed, actually thrive if they're able to go ahead and work their way through these large destructive waves that happen. And I just wanted to sort of go a quick aside, is that's what's happened with Silicon Valley. If you take a look at each one of the recessions that's happened, the dot-com bust that happened in the big nuclear winter. From that, little seeds sprouted, and we ended up with the next generation of technologies. 2008, a recession happened. A whole set of industries were destroyed, and brand new seeds of newly developed companies emerged. And the same thing is happening here with COVID, in that there was a number of industries that took big hits, consumer-facing ones especially, and we're starting to see new things grow. So a healthy ecosystem survives and thrives through that set of creative destruction. On that note, I interrupted you earlier because the question was, what's happening here within Ukraine and what elements are needed?
Yes, and actually I thought about the answer, and I think that there are two things that are really like the next big thing. So also other elements that are currently done, like education and everything, is just all really important and they need to proceed. But I think that what is still missing and what is just really could make a boom is the development of the local market, because Ukrainian IT is mostly export oriented, and we're doing a great job. Yes, we're just exporting. It's the third biggest export in the industry in Ukrainian economy, and we're really recognized and known, and our startups are succeeding. But what is happening is that the startup just starts to export right after it is created or search for investors. And I know that in other ecosystems, startups are first experimenting locally, and they are just finding their niches and their working models. And after that, after they get their first paying customers locally, they actually can export. And that actually concerns most the deep tech, like these solid solutions that are like really not about, I don't know, some digital or some marketing or business processes, but the ones that are solving the problems of the real sector of economy. And I think here, if we start working with the local market and help our companies to do it, like everybody will benefit. Of course, our economy will become more competitive and more digitalized, but also the startups will be more prepared to go abroad and will be more powerful because they will have this base, and then with this base they can do more as just winning these niches in other countries. I think this is one of the things to do, and the second one is to get more connected. So that is your next question, right? Yeah. So yeah, indeed, I think that for a long time Ukraine was not really transparent in terms of whom to talk to. I know that there are, like, because before I was was the director of Kyiv IT cluster, and already back then I was receiving a lot of questions of people that were searching for somebody just to really to connect, because there were people interested in our country before, and now this number is growing, but they need to have some, I don't know, respective recipients to talk to, because then this magic happens and something can be created. So indeed, I think that like we have these communities and co-working spaces, and we at TechUkraine also doing this job and really growing and helping just to find the right connections. So I believe that here, this is really very important. And answering your question about locations, I think that we need to be connected, of course, to the, first of all, it depends on the startups. Different startups need different markets, but generally, I think that we should join the high level this dialogue of the technologically developed countries. So this is US, this is Europe, this are also Asian countries that currently are also making their boost. But US and Europe are probably two regions that we're thinking about first when we're thinking whom to connect to.
So, thank you. I think we're now shifting into the actual title and purpose of this panel, and that is to think about Ukraine as an ecosystem and how does the Ukrainian ecosystem play on the global stage? How do you connect with individual ecosystems and the economy around the world? And Chris, I don't know if you have any thoughts. Where do you think Ukraine is in that cycle of being up on the global stage, and what steps would you recommend for Ukrainians to actually take it the next step?
So I think Ukraine is at an inflection point where, it has a great reputation for talent. People around the world in the technology community think, very talented technical people, very talented engineers, very talented programmers. But it doesn't have that reputation around building product, in terms of, companies being formed that are doing something other than offshoring, outsourcing, selling, well, we have really smart people and you have to pay them less. That's not a sustainable, position. The thing that, I think is really important, and I spoke about this briefly in the press panel that I was on, is that you have to find a way to create brain circulation. Craig Barrett at Intel was the one who introduced me to this phrase. It's the idea that you need to have smart people going back and forth between multiple places, between different tech hubs, between different clusters, and they have to go and spend a significant period of time there. You can't just go and spend, like from Ukraine, go spend a week in Silicon Valley. You're not going to build any really meaningful connections. You're not going to build any meaningful relationships. A friend of mine jokes about all these people who come, the government people who come for 1 week to go on tour. They joke about it as being the Silicon Valley safari, right? You drive along, it's like, oh, look, that's an engineer. Oh, there's a Googler, there's a Google bike. You have to find ways to get people to spend time in the other ecosystems, because that's where you create real meaningful human relationships. And, Zoom enables all kinds of things, but my belief is Zoom and all of these online tools are really effective if you have a relationship and you're trying to maintain the relationship. I already know somebody, we can catch up on Zoom and so forth. But when you're trying to actually, for the first time, build a relationship and you're trying to get to know someone, you have to do it in person. My belief is it's the way we're wired as people. Early in my career, I used to struggle with why are people going to all these business dinners? What's about the business dinner? But there is something of great value in that, where you have a chance to eat together, break bread, talk to each other, get to know each other on a personal and a professional level. And the only way you do that is to spend time in those ecosystems. And when you start getting these people coming back and forth, it multiplies. As I said, my own experience in Georgia is I started going to Georgia 2 years ago. And then I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I met 3 or 4 really interesting people. And then I turned around and I invited 3 or 4 of my friends from Silicon Valley to come and hang out for a while. And then, we invited some people from Georgia to come spend a couple weeks in Silicon Valley. And it's through creating those deep, meaningful personal relationships that then the fire happens. It explodes and it grows exponentially. And I do think there is a role for governments in terms of funding the facilitation of that, particularly in places that don't have, that are not as wealthy. For someone from Ukraine to go spend a month in Silicon Valley, that's a massive financial investment. And there are ways that you can structure that to support that. But you should also be looking at ways to get people from Silicon Valley, from London, from Berlin, from Singapore, from Tokyo here into Ukraine so that they can be building those relationships as well.
So Keith, what he's saying is that it shouldn't be the government people getting on planes and flying around. It should be government paying for other people to be on planes and fly around.
Was that a question?
It was a comment to prod you into a controversial statement.
So instead of public sector subsidized tourism, we should have private sector tourism funded by the public sector. Oh, that's much better. I don't necessarily, seriously though, disagree with that thinking. It's about how you execute and whether there's a measurable, rather a target and measurable output to see whether you're actually achieving anything with that, so that it doesn't just become a lot of, psychobabble bullshit.
Well, the data is really compelling on it.
There you go, data, I love that.
There's anybody who cares about ecosystems. There's a group out of San Francisco that produces something called the Global Ecosystem Report every year. And it's this massive 150-page, but all kinds of data. But one of the things that they studied a couple years ago was the impact of what they called global connectedness. And they were able to create a really compelling data-driven model that said that startup ecosystems that have a high degree of global connectedness, as measured by the founders, how many people do founders know in other ecosystems, and how many people in other ecosystems know founders in that ecosystem? So on a deeply personal basis, the high connectivity ecosystems, the high globally connected ecosystems, outperform the low ones by a factor of 4 to 5.
So the report he's talking about is the Startup Genome, and it's written by the Compass Group, Startup Genome. If anybody's interested in this topic at all, and I think the report's up to 250 pages now, it's insane, but it's got so much, it's great, great, great. Yes.
I actually wanted to add, you mentioned Startup Genome. I happened to be in one of their meetings. There was a side event at Web Summit, and they gathered the representatives from different ecosystems, those that are just participating in this, I think, really very great and useful project. Instead, they were really connecting to each other, and that was a very unique and special experience for me also to see how different countries and different key members from this associations, organizations. I remember that from the United States of America, there was the head of the Association of the Corporates, and from other organizations there were some government officials, and I think that was super useful. That is actually about connectedness and about cooperation, and also about personal meetings. Because I agree that this is very important, and you don't do business with the country you haven't visited. I just really believe that usually this is happening first, the emotional connection, and then when you see the surrounding, you breathe the air, you meet people, then you're saying, okay, I want to do business with this location. Or maybe for cooperation it's different, but for normal businesses, I think this is how it's happening.
This whole idea of measuring ecosystem effectiveness and doing a ranking, it's now a thing. And so Startup Genome has been around since around 2012, I think was the first report. There's another one here that Dominique is pretty involved with called Startup Blink that's out there as well. Startup Genome measures countries. Startup Blink takes a look at countries, but also cities. And Ukraine is somewhere in the middle on the world economy, but and those move up and down year by year, but the overall trend is up.
But this year, actually, it was a special one because Ukraine was in the top 30 countries instead of Blink
You cracked,
ecosystems.
really cracked
Right,
top 30.
so that was very, very pleasant also for us. And I believe the more information we are providing about our ecosystem, actually the better ranking is because they also gather in data, and the data is lacking, they are lowering the rank. So currently, this is better, and UNIT was the partner for Startup Blink, and we're TechUkraine, we're also the ecosystem partner, so we are providing the information to this report. So we're happy to see that the ranking is higher than before.
Excellent. We're getting close towards the end. I'm going to ask a question to the panel, and then if we do have time, I'm going to open up to a couple questions from the audience. But we're talking about connectedness here, and I just want to ask across the board, if you had to pick the top 3 ecosystems for Ukraine to connect with, where would you prioritize your activity? I know it's not mandated or there's no big authority doing that, but where do you think the most interesting places to connect with between Ukraine and the world? What would you pick?
Maybe we should start.
Where
from
would
the
you
other
buy
end.
your plane tickets?
Well, that's another story. But maybe we should start with Miguel because
Yeah, please.
Okay, I think the U.S.
But where in the U.S. then? U.S. is pretty big. You have a lot of ecosystems there.
Okay, you are from Silicon Valley, so go ahead, Silicon Valley.
Come on over. You're welcome.
Second, Israel,
Israel,
China,
China. And where in China?
Hong Kong, Shenzhen.
Hong Kong, Shenzhen. Excellent. Okay, Chris?
So I think you have to some degree, you have to find ways to connect with Silicon Valley. There's just too many companies, too much money, too many people, and so forth to ignore it. I agree with the comment on Israel. I think it's a fairly natural connect point out of Ukraine for a lot of reasons. And I also think there would be a lot of value in connecting to the ecosystem in Estonia, in Tallinn, in terms of is sort of a shared common post-Soviet experience, but with people who are farther down the road of developing a startup culture and a startup ecosystem and so forth. But I think there would be a fairly natural affinity there.
Keith? No, I'm being order. Say
he went after me anyway. I'm going to try not to. The old saying is, if you don't like the question you were asked, answer the question you wish you were asked. It's an old political trick. So I'll do that.
Okay.
Since I don't want to do this geographic cheerleading exercise. Instead, what I'd say is that I think you should look at your sector, your niche. Maybe to preface this, I disagree with this idea, all due respect, that you need this domestic market, this local market. I strongly disagree with that because I think what it does is it makes you complacent and lazy and turns you too easily into a lifestyle entrepreneur. I think instead, what we saw in the Nordic markets and also by the way, in Tallinn and in Vilnius was that being forced to go after international customers, anchor customers in specific niches, forced our customers to be born global, globally oriented from day one in everything they did, in the whole value chain, rather than building their products and services around what was familiar to them, made them speak the international lingua franca from day one. So I just don't agree with that idea that you need a local market. If you have one, great. But if you don't, then don't sweat it. Just go after the global customerships wherever they are. And then if you come back to your question, I'll almost answer it by saying that if you're looking at your individual niche and the more focused, the better, and breaking that down into its component parts, understanding who are the players on all sides of the value chain, every link in that individual niche, and building on that wherever they are. So recently I was involved in the automotive industry, specifically software, and you knew exactly where they were. You knew exactly where they were. It was a half a dozen locations in North America, in Europe, in Asia, where we needed to be connected with all the players. And so it was completely sector and niche specific. And so I think the answer is look in the mirror, look at your own niche, make sure you have one, first of all, and then make sure that you build or connect with those ecosystems in those zones which are most relevant to your own specific niche, and know everybody you need to know in that niche. Rather than looking at this as go to Silicon Valley or go to Boston or go to Atlanta or go to Tel Aviv or wherever you're going. I just don't think that it's a geographic game anymore. It's virtual in a sense and physical.
I would agree and disagree here because I believe that if the hub, like the technological hub, is really big, and there are a lot of companies, and there are a lot of investors, and there are a lot of startups, there is higher chances, according to this like basic law of statistics, that you will get more valuable connections out of the, I don't know, the city of 8 million versus the city of, I don't know, 600,000. So of course, for any startup, just they need to decide themselves which are the locations for their specific products or services. But I believe, like statistically, if we're looking at their like geographical locations in the world, I would really pick. I will not be probably very original here, but yes, United States, Silicon Valley, and also New York City area, because I believe that there is also a lot of startups and this good ecosystem over there, and London, because London is fairly big in terms of technology and in terms of, I don't know, its financial center, etc. And one more comment about the local market.
She couldn't let it go.
I would say that yes, you could succeed without the local market. And that's what Ukrainian technological ecosystem is currently doing. But if you have it, that would be better, because of course you have something to experiment on before you can go worldwide. But yes, of course you can live without as well. And this is what we're currently doing. Yeah.
All right. So we are out of time. I think this has been a really fun panel. I appreciate everybody that's contributed here. Thank you so much, Martin and Chris and Nataly and Keith as well. Keith, you as well. So thanks so much. Thank you for being here. Day one.